The cameras were rolling inside the View studios on what everyone thought would be just another ordinary morning. The lights, the audience chatter, the familiar theme music fading into place. Nothing about this day suggested that television history was about to be made. Producers expected a simple, promotional interview. After all, their guest was one of Hollywood's most respected actresses, known not just for her talent but for her grace and professionalism. She had come to discuss her latest film, a project the studio was already buzzing about. What nobody expected was that this interview would spiral into one of the most explosive confrontations ever captured on daytime television, a clash so raw and unfiltered that it would leave the entire studio stunned into silence. If you're watching this, I want you to ask yourself, have you ever seen a moment so unhinged, so brutally honest, that it felt like the curtain was being ripped down on live TV? Because that's exactly what you're about to witness. The actress settled into the guest chair, smiling politely as the audience applauded. Across the table, Joy Behar wore the kind of smirk her regular viewers knew well. That sly curve of the mouth, the look that meant she was preparing to stir the pot. Joy leaned forward, eyes glinting with that mischievous spark. "So, Mariel," she began, her tone laced with exaggerated interest. "Tell us about this new movie of yours." I have to say, when I read the synopsis, I couldn't help but wonder, has Hollywood finally run out of original ideas? It was an unusually sharp opening, even for Joy. The other panelists exchanged quick glances. Whoopi Goldberg shifted in her chair, Sarah Haynes stared at her notes, and the energy in the room suddenly changed. Mariel, however, maintained her composure, offering only a small, polite smile. She leaned in slightly, her voice calm and measured. "Well, Joy, I think storytelling has always revisited themes that resonate with the human experience. This film explores the complexity of family dynamics during times of crisis. And given what so many families have been through recently, it feels particularly relevant." Joy waved her hand dismissively, cutting her off. "Oh, please, Mariel. Let's be honest here. You've made a career out of playing the same tortured woman over and over again. The crying, the dramatic speeches, the suffering artist routine. Don't you think audiences are tired of watching you cry on screen for 2 hours straight?" The studio fell quiet. The air shifted. Even the production crew paused, sensing something was off. Whoopi cleared her throat, trying to ease the tension, but no one could ignore what had just happened. This wasn't playful banter. This was personal. Mariel set her glass down gently, her eyes locking on Joy with a calm steadiness. "That's an interesting perspective, Joy," she replied. "I'm curious, though. What would you consider authentic storytelling? Because from where I sit, exploring human emotion and vulnerability is exactly what art should do." Joy's scoff was audible, her voice rising slightly. "Authentic? Authentic would be admitting you've been coasting on your reputation for decades. You get nominated for everything because you're Meryl Streep, not because the performances are that remarkable anymore. It's like the emperor's new clothes, and no one wants to admit it." The tension was electric now. The audience had gone completely still, watching the exchange unfold with wide eyes. Mariel didn't flinch. Her smile lingered, but her tone grew sharper. "So, you believe recognition comes from some kind of conspiracy rather than craft and dedication? Tell me, Joy, what's your background in performance? What gives you the authority to make such sweeping judgments about artistic merit?" For the first time, Joy faltered. Her cheeks flushed, and her smirk faltered. "I don't need to be a chef to know when food tastes bad, Mariel. I've been in this business long enough to know manufactured excellence when I see it." "This business?" Mariel repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean television hosting? Because acting, real acting, requires a level of vulnerability and skill that I'm not sure you'd understand. It's not about delivering opinions from behind a desk. It's about stripping yourself down to your most vulnerable self in front of millions of strangers. That's not something you can dismiss with a wave of the hand." The other hosts were visibly uncomfortable. Sarah shuffled her notes nervously. Whoopi tried to cut in, but Joy wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, here we go with the superiority complex. You think because you've got a bunch of awards that you're untouchable? Please. I've been calling out Hollywood phonies since before you were doing those ridiculous accents in every other film. The composure finally cracked. Mariel's smile hardened. Phonies? That's rich, coming from someone whose entire career is built on manufactured outrage and uninformed commentary. You want to talk about authentic? Let's discuss what's authentic about sitting here every day spouting opinions about subjects you clearly don't understand, while real artists are out there creating something meaningful. The audience gasped. Even the camera operators froze, unsure whether to cut to commercial or keep rolling. Whoopi pressed her forehead into her hand, silently begging for this to end, but the clash had only just begun. Mariel leaned back in her chair, her eyes still locked on Joy. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and everyone felt it. For the first time, Joy Behar seemed to be on the defensive, her voice sharper, her body language tighter. "Don't you dare lecture me about understanding," Joy snapped. "I've been watching films since before you were even acting. I know what I see, and what I see is someone who thinks she's above criticism." Above criticism? Mariel laughed softly, but there was no warmth in the sound. "Joy, I've been criticized by the sharpest minds in theater and film. The difference is they knew what they were talking about. They understood technique, emotional truth, the relationship between text and performance. What you're offering here isn't criticism. It's a personal attack disguised as commentary." The words landed like a thunderclap. Joy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The silence in the room was suffocating. The tension had escalated far beyond what anyone expected. And this, right here, is where the cracks started to spread. One of the most respected actresses in the world was refusing to play along with daytime television's usual banter. She wasn't backing down, and she wasn't letting Joy off the hook. What began as a casual interview was turning into one of the most brutal dismantlings daytime television had ever seen. So let me ask you, if you were in that studio audience, what would you be feeling right now? Would you be rooting for Joy to push harder, or would you be holding your breath, waiting to see how far Mariel would go? Because trust me, this was only the beginning, and things were about to get much worse. The silence inside the studio was heavy, the kind of silence that makes people shift in their seats and hold their breath. Joy Behar sat there, blinking, her smirk slipping away, and Mariel, calm and unshaken, leaned forward just slightly, her presence commanding the room. You could feel the tension through the cameras, and millions of viewers watching at home would later say they'd never seen anything like it. This wasn't television fluff anymore. This was something deeper, rawer, and far more dangerous. Joy finally found her voice again, but it came out sharper than usual, defensive, almost trembling with anger. "Personal attacks," she said, her tone rising. "You want to talk about personal attacks? Let me tell you what's personal. Watching someone like you parade around Hollywood for 40 years, acting like you're doing Shakespeare when half the time you're just putting on funny voices and calling it acting. You think you're Katharine Hepburn, but honey, you're not even close." The gasp from the studio audience was almost physical, like a wave of shock rippling through the room. Whoopi closed her eyes, her hand pressed against her temple, as though the words themselves gave her a headache. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. This was no longer an interview, it was a knife fight, and Joy had just swung wildly. Mariel didn't flinch. She let the insult hang in the air for a moment, the quiet stretching until it felt unbearable. And then she set her hands calmly on the table, her voice low but cutting. "Phonies, funny voices, imitations. That's rich, Joy. Especially coming from someone whose entire career is built on manufactured outrage. You confuse noise with insight. You think being loud makes you relevant. But let's be clear, you've never created anything. You've never risked anything. You sit here day after day and take cheap shots, because real artistry requires courage. And that's something you clearly don't understand." Her words sliced through the silence like a blade. The audience froze, the camera operators stayed locked in place, and even the producers in the control room seemed stunned into hesitation. Should they cut to commercial? Should they let it play out? Nobody seemed to know the right move, because the confrontation had taken on a life of its own. Joy's face flushed deep red, her hands twitching on the desk. "I don't need to be an actress to know bad acting when I see it," she snapped, her voice cracking slightly under the strain. "I've been in this business long enough to know when someone is phoning it in." "This business," Mariel repeated softly, tilting her head. Her eyes were steady, piercing, unrelenting. "You mean television hosting? Because acting, real acting, requires you to strip away every layer of protection. To stand on stage or in front of a camera and expose your heart, your soul, your flaws. It demands discipline, study, and humility. You think it's the same as throwing insults from a safe chair behind a desk? That's not bravery, Joy. That's cowardice disguised as commentary." For the first time in her career, Joy seemed rattled. Truly rattled. Her usual quick wit faltered, her comebacks slipping out half-formed and brittle. "Oh, here we go again," she sneered weakly. "The superiority complex. You think you're better than everyone else because you've got a shelf full of awards? Let me tell you something. Awards don't make you special. They make you lucky." Mariel leaned in now, her voice sharper, her words precise. "Luck didn't prepare me to play women broken by war, or mothers burying children, or voices silenced by history. Luck didn't teach me to find truth in silence, to hold an audience with a single breath. That's not luck, Joy. That's years of study, craft, and sacrifice. Do not confuse your bitterness with truth." The audience audibly murmured now, a ripple of agreement breaking through the silence. You could see people in the crowd nodding, whispering, some even clapping before being hushed. It was clear Mariel had the room. Joy was losing it, and she knew it. Joy's voice rose higher, shriller. "You want to lecture me on sacrifice? I've been sitting in this chair for years asking the tough questions that no one else will ask. I create conversation. I create dialogue. I make people think." Mariel smiled then, but it wasn't the warm, charming smile audiences were used to. It was sharp, almost pitying.
"No, Joy.
You don't create dialogue. You create conflict. There's a difference. A tough question challenges someone's ideas, their process, their perspective. You don't ask tough questions. You take cheap shots. That's not journalism, Joy. That's not even decent entertainment. It's cruelty packaged as commentary." Joy opened her mouth to argue, but Mariel's voice cut through like thunder. "And do you want to know what's worse? You think cruelty makes you brave. You think, because people react, you're relevant. But cruelty is easy. Anyone can do it. What's hard, what's rare, is generosity, thoughtfulness, the courage to actually understand what you're criticizing. That's what you lack. And that's why your words mean nothing." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Joy seemed to shrink back in her chair, her shoulders tight, her face pale now beneath the harsh studio lights. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion. And the millions of viewers at home would later say they could feel it through the screen, the moment Joy Behar realized she had lost control. Sarah tried desperately to step in. "I think what's important here," she stammered, "is that art means different things to different people and maybe." But Mariel wasn't finished. She turned her head slightly, her gaze never leaving Joy.
"No, Sarah.
Let's not pretend this is about different perspectives. Joy has made it very clear. She doesn't believe training, craft, or decades of experience matter. She thinks opinion equals insight, and she mistakes hostility for honesty. That's not perspective. That's ignorance." Joy snapped back, her voice cracking. "Don't you dare call me ignorant. I've been doing this longer than you've been." "Longer doesn't mean better," Mariel interrupted, her tone steady and unyielding. "It just means you've been making the same mistakes for longer." That line hit like a hammer. The audience gasped again, and this time a few couldn't help but clap, their applause cutting through the silence before being quickly silenced by producers. Whoopi sighed audibly, her patience stretched thin. She looked at the cameras, her voice heavy. "We're going to take a quick break." But before she could finish, Joy cut in, her voice shrill with desperation.
"No.
Don't you dare. I'm not finished. She thinks she can come on my show and humiliate me? She thinks she's untouchable. Mariel leaned forward, her voice quiet, almost intimate, but carrying across the studio with chilling clarity. Joy, you've been humiliated by your own words.
I don't need to do a thing.
You've shown everyone exactly who you are. And with that, the air was sucked out of the room. The audience sat frozen. The host stared in disbelief. And Joy Behar, for once in her long career, had no comeback. So I'll ask you, if you were Joy in this moment, would you double down and keep fighting? Or would you finally realize that maybe, just maybe, you'd pushed too far? Because the truth is, the fight was far from over. And in part 3, things would reach a breaking point that no one, not the hosts, not the producers, not even Mariel herself, saw coming. When the cameras cut back from commercial, the tension in the studio hadn't gone anywhere. If anything, it had deepened, the air charged like a thunderstorm waiting to break. The audience sat in silence, uncertain if they were watching a daytime talk show or a live meltdown unfolding in real time. On one side of the table, Joy Behar leaned forward, still flushed, her voice trembling with the need to reclaim control. On the other, Mariel sat tall and composed, her hands folded neatly, her eyes calm but unrelenting. The contrast could not have been sharper, and everyone watching knew that something unforgettable was about to happen. Joy tried to strike first. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through it. You think you can come on my show and put me in my place? You think this is some kind of masterclass in humility? Let me tell you something, Mariel. People are tired of you. Tired of your same old tricks. You're not as relevant as you think you are. The words rang out, sharp and cutting, but they didn't land the way Joy intended. Instead, the audience groaned softly, uncomfortable with the sheer bitterness of the remark. Whoopi closed her eyes again, shaking her head ever so slightly. Sarah clutched her notes like a lifeline. The energy in the room screamed one thing. Joy was spiraling. Mariel didn't blink. Her voice was calm, steady, almost surgical. Relevance, Joy, isn't measured by how loud you are or how many cheap shots you throw. It's measured by the impact of your work, by what you leave behind. When people look back on your career, what will they remember? Manufactured outrage? Shallow commentary? Or will they remember an artist who actually gave them something meaningful? I know what I'll leave behind.
Do you?
The audience broke into applause. It wasn't the usual daytime clapping, either. It was hesitant at first, then strong, as though they couldn't hold back any longer. The sound filled the studio, and Joy's face paled under the lights. For once, her command of the room was gone, ripped away in an instant. You're unbelievable, Joy spat, her voice shaking. You think you're some kind of saint because you cry on cue and put on accents? You think that's art? Half the time it's parody. You're a parody of yourself. Mariel leaned in, her voice low but cutting, every syllable deliberate. Joy, parody is sitting at this table every day pretending to be an authority on everything under the sun. Parody is mistaking cruelty for journalism. And parody is attacking a woman's age, appearance, or career because you can't win an argument with substance. The studio gasped again. This wasn't just pushback, it was dissection. Mariel wasn't sparring anymore, she was dismantling. Piece by piece, word by word, she was pulling apart Joy's entire persona in front of millions. Joy slammed her hand on the table, her voice shrill. Don't you dare lecture me. I've been doing this longer than you've been acting. I've seen them all come and go, and let me tell you, you're no different. One day people will stop caring about you, too. Mariel tilted her head, her tone soft, almost pitying now. Yes, one day they will. That's the nature of this business. But the difference is, when my time is over, I'll know I gave everything I had to my craft. I'll know I respected the work, the audience, and the truth. What will you know, Joy? That you shouted the loudest? That you humiliated the most guests? That you confused hostility for honesty? That's not a legacy. That's a warning. The room was silent again. You could almost hear the hum of the cameras, the faint shuffle of producers in the control booth. The audience sat on the edge of their seats, caught between fascination and disbelief. Whoopi tried once more to step in, her voice weary. Ladies, maybe we should. But Mariel raised her hand slightly, her eyes never leaving Joy. No, Whoopi. Let her finish. Joy says she asks the tough questions. Well, let's give her some real ones. She turned back to Joy, her gaze sharp as glass. In all your years of hosting, can you name one moment when your confrontational approach actually created understanding instead of hostility? Just one moment when your words made someone think, instead of just bleed. Joy's mouth opened, but no answer came. Her lips parted, her breath hitched, but silence followed. The audience felt the weight of the question, the impossible challenge hanging in the air. Mariel pressed on. Here's another question. Can you explain to your viewers why you think personal attacks constitute journalism? Because if that's true, then we've lowered the bar so far that we can't even call it television anymore. It's spectacle. Empty noise. Joy's voice came back, thin and brittle. I'm not a bully. I ask questions people are too scared to ask. Mariel shook her head slowly, her expression firm.
No, Joy.
You confuse cruelty with courage. Being disliked for asking thoughtful questions is one thing. Being disliked because you humiliate people for sport is something else entirely. You don't ask the questions people are afraid to ask. You ask the ones no one cares about because they don't lead anywhere but down. The audience broke into applause again, louder this time, unable to contain themselves. The energy shifted completely, the weight of the room pressing on Joy. She looked around desperately, hoping for a lifeline from Whoopi or Sarah, but none came. Sarah stared at her lap. Whoopi leaned back with a sigh. It was clear. She was on her own. Mariel leaned forward again, her voice sharper now. Let me give you an example of a real question, Joy. If you wanted to challenge me, you could have asked, Mariel, your film explores resilience in the face of adversity. How does that connect to your own life experiences as an artist? That would have been substantive. That would have opened a discussion. Instead, you chose insults. You chose dismissal. That's not journalism. That's lazy provocation. Joy tried again to interject, her voice rising. That's not fair. But Mariel cut her off. What's not fair, Joy, is wasting your platform. Millions of people tune in every day. You have the power to educate, to illuminate, to dig deeper. Instead, you choose to tear down. And now, when someone holds a mirror up to you, you don't like what you see. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Joy's face was pale now, her hands trembling slightly on the desk. The audience could see it, the millions at home could see it. For the first time, Joy Behar had been cornered. Not by a producer, not by ratings, but by truth itself. So let me ask you, if you were in Joy's seat right now, what would you do? Would you swallow your pride and admit that maybe, just maybe, you'd gone too far? Or would you double down and risk total humiliation? Because in the next act of this clash, Joy makes her choice, and it changes everything. The silence in the studio felt suffocating. Cameras rolled, lights burned hot, and yet the weight of that moment was so heavy you could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the audience. Joy Behar, a woman who had made a career out of verbal combat, sat visibly rattled, her usual sharpness dulled under the relentless precision of Mariel's words. For the first time in years, the queen of daytime hostility wasn't steering the ship. She was drowning in it. Joy tried to force a laugh, a brittle sound that fooled no one. You've got quite the speech prepared, don't you? Almost like you rehearsed this little takedown before you came here. Mariel leaned back, her expression calm, her voice even. I don't need to rehearse, Joy. The truth doesn't require preparation. The audience erupted again, clapping and cheering. Some even stood, emboldened by the sharpness of the moment. Joy's smile faltered. Her authority, her dominance, her control, slipping further with each passing second. Whoopi leaned forward, desperate to reel the show back into something salvageable. All right, maybe we can. But Joy raised her voice, cutting her off.
No.
Let her finish. Let the great Meryl Streep lecture us all on morality. Her tone dripped with sarcasm, but the desperation in her voice was impossible to miss. It wasn't control. It was collapse. Mariel's response was softer this time, almost pitying. I don't need to lecture, Joy. You've done that to yourself. The sad part is, you think this hostility makes you memorable. But it doesn't. It makes you replaceable. Because hostility ages fast. Compassion lasts longer. And that's something you never understood. The studio audience was on its feet now. The applause shook the room, rolling through the air like thunder. Joy sat frozen, her eyes darting to the crew, to her co-hosts, to the cameras. Nowhere to run. No rescue coming. Sarah finally spoke, her voice trembling. Maybe we should move on to the next segment. But it was too late. Mariel wasn't finished. She leaned forward one last time, her voice low, deliberate, and unforgettable. Joy, when this moment is replayed, and it will be replayed, it won't be remembered as you putting me in my place. It will be remembered as the day you showed everyone exactly who you are when faced with truth. And the world will decide for themselves if that's who they want to keep listening to. The words hung like smoke in the air, impossible to clear, impossible to deny. Joy's face hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. She tried for one final jab. Well, enjoy your little standing ovation. Let's see how long it lasts when the cameras aren't here. Mariel's eyes didn't waver. The cameras don't define me, Joy. They never did.
But you?
Without them, what do you have? And with that, the silence returned. The audience gasped, then erupted one final time into applause, louder than ever, deafening in its clarity. This wasn't just approval, it was vindication. Mariel had won, not by shouting louder, but by speaking truer. Whoopi buried her face in her hands. Sarah sat back, wide-eyed. The control booth scrambled, cutting to commercial with a suddenness that only confirmed the chaos. But by then, the moment was already etched into television history. The aftermath was immediate. Within hours, clips of the exchange spread like wildfire across social media. Millions watched and rewatched as Joy Behar, a woman long untouchable on her own turf, was dismantled by the grace and steel of Meryl Streep. Hashtags trended. Memes exploded. Comment sections filled with shock, admiration, and, for Joy, brutal criticism. Some called it a masterclass in composure under fire. Others called it the end of an era for Joy Behar. Whatever the perspective, one thing was undeniable. People couldn't stop talking about it. Joy remained silent for days, an unusual move for someone known to relish the spotlight. Her defenders tried to spin the exchange as a spirited debate, but the footage told a different story. There was no mistaking the imbalance, no denying the way the room shifted, no ignoring how the audience chose sides. Meanwhile, Mariel didn't gloat. She didn't go on press tours to boast about her victory. She didn't give sound bites to tabloids. She simply moved forward, continuing her promotion of the film, speaking only about the work itself. That restraint, that refusal to weaponize the moment for clout, only deepened the respect people already had for her. And that's why the clash resonated so deeply. Because this wasn't just an argument on daytime TV. It was a battle between two approaches to influence. One built on confrontation, volume, and spectacle. The other built on truth, dignity, and a refusal to be dragged into the mud. Think about it. How often do we see someone resist the urge to shout back, to insult, to mirror hostility with hostility? How often do we see someone hold their ground with composure, clarity, and strength? That's why this moment mattered. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a lesson. A lesson that bullies thrive until they meet someone who won't play their game. A lesson that composure is sometimes the sharpest weapon of all. And most of all, a lesson that legacy isn't built on the loudest voice in a room. It's built on the truest. So I'll ask you this. If you were in Mariel's shoes that day, could you have stayed calm under fire? Could you have chosen dignity over anger? Or would you have let Joy's attacks pull you into the same pit she lives in? Because that's the power of the story. It forces us to look inward, to ask ourselves how we'd respond when provoked, when cornered, when humiliated. Do we lash out? Or do we rise above? For Mariel, the answer was clear. And that's why this clash will be remembered. not as Joy Behar versus Meryl Streep, but as hostility versus grace, spectacle versus substance, noise versus truth. And truth, as always, won.